We've spent the past 2 videos discussing the discoveries made by both the CIA and the Monroe Institute in a secret government project known as the Gateway Experience. The CIA documents reveal discoveries of worlds outside of our three-dimensional perceptions. They explain the nature of reality and even confirm the existence of an omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent higher power, and even the existence of intelligent, non-human entities that exist just beyond the veil of our reality, which may or may not have negative intentions for us. We've covered the science behind the protocols used by the CIA to enter into the out-of-body state called the Gateway process, so that if you wish, you can test these methods for yourself and hopefully, with a little practice, be able to journey out of the body and into the astral yourself. According to the CIA, as long as you are motivated and able and willing to release your fears, stress, and anxieties, this method will work for you sooner or later, and you will be able to travel the universe using only your mind. I wanted to make this 3rd installment into this series to discuss something that I haven't really heard anybody else talk about at this point, and that is what happened to Robert Monroe after the CIA project ended, because his research and discoveries didn't end with Project Gateway. So let's travel back to 1985 when the Gateway process experiments ended, and the CIA collected all of their data and left the Monroe Institute to finish Project Stargate elsewhere. Let's find out what Robert Monroe discovered that the CIA documents don't cover. Robert Monroe, a radio broadcasting mogul, dedicated the last half of his life to out-of-body phenomena, which is now popularly known as astral projection. After his first out-of-body experience, he redirected his entire company's focus and founded the Monroe Institute, which focuses on research and development of technology, which can induce the out-of-body state as well as studies the nature of human consciousness itself. Monroe doesn't go into a ton of detail in his final book regarding the CIA program, given that during this time period, when the books were published, Project Gateway Experience was still very much classified. It is my opinion that there was a gag order on at least some of the discoveries, meaning that there were probably very clear lines regarding what Monroe could and could not write about in his memoir. However, the research and exploration into higher dimensions never ceased following the CIA's departure. We know from part 1 and 2 of this series that it's possible to travel literally anywhere in the universe when in the out-of-body state, past, present, and even future, and that you can travel beyond the 3rd dimension into the astral plane, the 5th dimension, and so on. The possibilities are endless. So imagine being Robert Monroe, a man who's had the means to fund all the leading research on out-of-body experiences at the time, and has possibly the most talent for being able to achieve this phenomena at will. What else did he experience in the OBE state? What knowledge of life and the universe did he obtain, and who or what did he encounter there? And indeed, what more could you ask for? But this would change for Robert the more time he spent with the InSpecs. Now, I've covered the InSpecs quite a bit in the other videos. The word InSpec stands for intelligent species. They're basically described as beings of light, with no physical body per se. But it's a mystery as to exactly what these things are and where they come from. Recently, there have been a few creators who have started diving into the whole electric universe, plasma rabbit hole, and I can't help but look at the plasma sprites and think this is exactly how Robert described the InSpecs. It's neat to have some visual representation of what these things may have looked like. It seems to me that they are higher dimensional beings who have ascended and incarnated to higher planes of consciousness. However, it is mentioned in the books that this does not mean that all of the InSpecs were previously human at one point. Robert says that some of the InSpecs that he was friends with were never human at all and had an entirely different origin than us. In the out-of-body state, you can find the InSpecs. They're located just beyond the 3rd dimension, beyond the H-band noise. But if you have any anxiety or fears surrounding the paranormal, like you're afraid to meet a ghost or an alien or something like that, you won't be able to find them. For some reason, fear blocks our ability to communicate with these things. So you'll have to let all that go and you will be able to find them, but just remember that fear is the mind killer. Robert at one point did try to get to the bottom of what exactly these things are. While speaking with one, he wondered to himself, is this inspec an extraterrestrial? And the inspec immediately quashes his idea by saying, we are not the extraterrestrials, as you mean it. Robert then speculates based on the appearance of the inspecs, that of a body made entirely of light radiation, that perhaps these are angels or even gods. Perhaps the inspecs were the someone who created our Earth. Again, the inspec denied this. It is beyond your experience to understand at this time. But you will understand, and very soon. Apparently, inspecs can assist humans in the third dimension, similar to guardian angels, though. The inspec explained, all you need to do is ask for help. The words and rituals are meaningless. It is the thought, the emotion, that is the signal. If the proper signal is received, we are able to help. After the CIA project, Robert struggled with understanding his path in life. Now you may think this is a bit odd, as Robert was seemingly born with a rare natural proclivity to astral travel as no human in known history had done before. He had the knowledge and ability to travel through space-time and beyond, but why? What exactly was he meant to do with all of this? Write books? Give interviews? Be a pawn for a CIA defense program? Robert brought his concerns to the inspecs. When the inspec responded questioning if Robert had any personal goals, he said, probably to help mankind in some way. The inspec said, yes, that this was a very noble goal, but that there are other goals. The wish to help mankind in and of itself is rooted in human experience. It's a part of the Earth life system that we exist in. It is all that we have. It was inevitably not only based in his ego, but futile, as nothing Robert did in service to mankind could change the human destiny. What is meant to happen will happen. Time doesn't exist outside of the third dimension. Everything that has ever happened and ever will happen is happening all at once. And therefore, for it to be a goal of Robert alone to change the course of human progress is essentially irrelevant to his path in life, because whatever Robert is meant to do will be done regardless of which goals he sets out to accomplish. The inspec alluded to an even greater goal, but refrained from elaborating on this further. When Robert met with the inspecs from then on, they began putting him through simulation tests. At night, as he astral projected, he would live through scenarios knowing that they weren't real, but experiencing them just the same. At the end of each simulation, he would be met with a problem, and if he chose the correct course of action, he would move on to another test. If he chose wrong, a click would sound and he would be back in the astral with the inspecs. And then the next night, the same test would be repeated night after night until he made the correct decision at the end. Though none of these simulation tests were set in Robert's everyday life, they were set on Earth and in human situations. But the big difference with these things was that Robert began experiencing physical sensations in his waking life. So we're talking about like racing heartbeat, headaches, nausea, just a general dysregulation of the nervous system. He felt like his body was going through the simulations as well as his mind. Now, this was a brand new experience. This has never happened before. And because this was so disruptive to his everyday life, he developed an ambition to find answers as to why this was happening. One such night, he phased into the out-of-body state and felt a signal calling to him. He chose to follow it, and he was transported to a scene resembling ancient Greece, where a fierce battle was going on. He noticed a younger man standing next to him who seemed nervous. He observed the fight and saw another young man in a toga die from a spear wound, and he decided to step in, telling him to stand up. The young man's soul stood up from his physical body, and Robert explained to the man that he had died. He had died in the battle, and there was nothing else he could do to help his friends. This took a bit of convincing, as the slain man wasn't really hearing any of it at first. Robert took the man's hand and began flying him upwards. Once they'd flown high above the battlefield, Robert realized that he didn't really know what to do next. He didn't know where to take the young man. He didn't know how to take him to heaven or help him move on, and just as quickly the young man disappeared and Robert was alone again. The next day, upon reflection, Robert realized that this had not been the first time he had witnessed such a scene. Years earlier, he'd traveled there with a guide. He realized in that moment that the younger, nervous man had been his younger self, and he, as his older self, had shown his younger self that simulation years earlier. Not only that, this is going to get really weird, but Robert remembered that he was shown the battle to explain a pain in his body that he'd been experiencing at the time, which was the spear wound that killed the young Greek man. So basically, Robert had experienced 3 versions of himself all within the same simulation, as he was also the young Greek man who was slain by the spear. All 3 versions of Robert were there at the exact same time, to help each other. He then could pinpoint numerous times throughout his life, not just in the out-of-body experiences, where he'd been in trouble and called out for help, and then miraculously, help would arrive. His older self in the out-of-body state had been helping guide him all along. Why was he being shown these things specifically? What lesson was he meant to learn? Robert decided that in order to understand what the hell was going on, not only would he help himself, but he would help others in the out-of-body state, those who had recently died and were either frightened or confused. He would phase out of body every night and wait for a signal, and one always came. Most people had no idea that they were dead, so that was always a hurdle to overcome. Many never even believed him. One woman accused Robert of being one of Satan's devils. The real problem for Robert, though, was even when he was able to convince them that they were dead and they should come with him, he always lost them on the ascent from Earth. He couldn't figure out how to transport their souls to wherever they were supposed to move on to. He knew he was supposed to help them in some way, but he had no idea where to take any of them. Every night, like clockwork, he would phase out and into the out-of-body state, receive a signal, and follow it through time and space to help the lost souls. He did this over and over and over until finally, one night, he received a very different kind of signal. At first, he resisted, but then something overrode his apprehension, and he followed. He woke up in a cot in a white room. An ageless woman was there. She was very familiar to him, but he didn't know who she was. She showed him hundreds of other people, thousands of faces as far as Robert could see, and then he realized that they were all him. Every incarnation of himself throughout the past, present, and even the future. The woman said that this was the first time they'd been able to all meet at once. She said that the reason for this was that now Robert had released his preconceived belief system, and even though some of the faces had a few beliefs left, they all could release them at will. They were no longer slaves to their own belief system. This ability to believe and yet remain open-minded is what freed Robert's consciousness from the realm of time and space, the matrix, the trap. The woman explained, "Now we are waking up from the dream." Robert named this woman his I there, as opposed to his I here, which would have been himself. She was the personification of his seed of consciousness. She represented all previous and present lifetimes. After this experience, when Robert entered into the astral realm, he stopped listening or searching for things outside of himself and instead dove inward. He did this for 1 year. Rather than explore the universe, he decided to explore the depths of his own soul. He found that the self is composed of its own macrocosm, just like the observable physical universe. The first layer of the soul that he journeyed to was what Monroe called the memory layer. It was a place that contained every moment of his life to date, with more pouring in that matched his current thoughts and actions. It was a massive archive of echoes from his past. And it was more than conscious memory. It was physical memory as well. He says that he could rummage through filing cabinets of memory, and if he selected one, he could relive the memory to a T down to each thought, emotion, and sensory input. The next layer was the fear layer. This is exactly what you'd imagine. It was a dark place where every personal fear of Robert's lurked, even fears he didn't know he had, and there were even new fears developing as he watched it all. But luckily, some fears were being dissolved. Next was the emotional layer. He described this as a cloud of energy containing every emotion he'd ever felt, neatly organized in a pattern. The core of his soul is referred to by Robert as the repertory, but before you can get to this, there is a gray barrier made up of the energy of the Earth life system addiction and the multitude of belief systems generated therein. However, Robert was able to pass through this barrier. He found a hole made from erosion due to his own practice of consciousness exploration. Robert's open-mindedness held the key to unlocking his own soul. Once past this barrier, and in the center of himself, Robert described hundreds of what appeared to be waving beams of multicolored light. Here, he encountered the archetypes of himself, and then finally, his I there, his higher self. But Robert, ever fond of acronyms, called this his XCOM, short for Executive Committee. The higher self explained the process of Robert's beginnings. You did not exist. We made the conscious decision to become human again. We selected the time and the place and organized the DNA mix, elements from the physical and elements from us. We took those parts of us that seemed most appropriate, rolled them up into one, and sent them in. There you and we were. Robert is then informed that he only has one lifetime left, one last orbit around Earth before his true self will be ready to move beyond the Earth life system and ascend to higher dimensions, to freedom. They explain that Robert's life and discoveries are indeed very important, and that he's going to find the way out. This confuses Robert. Find the way out of what, he asks. And they respond, find the way to escape velocity. To escape velocity. I think they meant to escape time and space. Escape the third dimension. Following this interaction, Robert's higher self would be as close to him as his own skin. Robert continued his rescue missions, but with his higher self in tow. Most of the deceased were not a part of his soul cluster, so they still disappeared into the belief systems as they had before. But sometimes, they would witness the deceased break through the illusion of the third dimension. All it took was a shred of doubt, a question, and then boom, they were free. Robert asked his higher self if it was the only influence on his day-to-day life. Was it his intuition, his God, his higher power? And it replied that no, that there were trillions of other non-human intelligences that meddle in human affairs for better or often for worse. This input of influences has been affecting mankind since its beginning. However, it added that only once in all of Robert's lifetimes had he ever come face to face with one of these non-human entities in his waking life. It also added that humans have a mystical effect on one another, as well as via the M field. If you don't remember the M field, we spoke about in other videos. It's a broad field of energy between all life forms. It is the only energy field common to and operational both within and outside the third dimension, and it is present in varying degrees in all physical matter. It is literally life. It is your gut feelings, charisma, the placebo effect, your instant likes and dislikes, disgust, and love at first sight are all feelings typically without justification, and products of the M field. Few humans are aware of this field of energy at all, and even fewer have the ability to manipulate it themselves. The most apparent of these individuals, history records as political or religious leaders. The most skilled are able to avoid notoriety at all and achieve their goals without notice. The lesser of these individuals we would know as medicine men, witches, the very first kings and emperors, mind readers, healers, and the like. The power of belief and belief systems lies in the various manipulations of the infield energy. Your beliefs become knowns when you recognize or experience this manipulation. Out of 6 billion people, Monroe wagers that there are 600 humans in physical existence who can knowingly manipulate the infield. They are on the loose and unrecognized, and they can do, covertly, anything imaginable, and also much that we cannot imagine. The emotional radiation of others can help or harm you, and vice versa. Robert is shown visually how all of our souls are connected like a spider's web via the infield radiation. When we ascend, those who are soul bonded to us in this way ascend with us. Robert is given these teachings and many more from his higher self, and with this knowledge in tow, he makes the decision to journey outward this time. To journey outward farther than he or any of the explorers ever have. He travels out of body, out of his home, out of Earth's orbit, past the belief system territories locked around us, past the H-band, farther and farther and farther. Along the way, different entities appear to him, claiming to be God in an attempt to frighten him back to Earth. Terrified, he pushes forward, knowing that he'd never be able to thwart the command of a real God. He flies to the very edge of the third dimension, where he finds what he calls the emitter, the point of the creation of the hologram. He sees the torus, and the white hole in its center is the emitter, a closed loop of creation, time, and space. There he receives a download answering all of his questions of the universe, and he writes that his essence was changed forever. There was not simply a new revelation, some divine epiphany, but a remembering. His soul remembered the only truth, that we, our true selves, our consciousness, our souls, are completely free and limitless. The core of who or what we are is infinite consciousness. While our bodies are bound to this three-dimensional world, we are simply consciousness experiencing it. It took him many weeks of contemplation to recover from this steep run. And the word recovery isn't quite accurate, as Robert says that he never fully recovered from what he'd seen. The change in him was absolutely permanent. Robert's body began rejecting any substance that is used to alter human consciousness. So alcohol had no effect on him, prescription drugs, nope. Caffeine, no. Even anesthesia stopped working on him, and LSD proved completely ineffective. Robert Monroe suddenly had everything he'd been needing. He could now see the thing that he'd been searching for. He finally understood his true purpose: to help humankind in its spiritual growth by teaching the true nature of ourselves. He was supposed to tell others what he'd discovered at the emitter, but that in itself wouldn't be enough. Sure, some people might believe him, but remember what we've said about beliefs versus knowns. Knowns, knowing, is more powerful than believing, and in order to know what Robert now knew, he'd have to teach people how to travel so far out on their own, to see for themselves, because personal experience is the only way to truly know anything. And by bestowing these abilities onto others, Robert was furthering the evolution of the mass consciousness of the Earth. He would be assisting in getting us one step closer to escape. He realized that it is not only important for the individual to spiritually ascend, but for humankind to do it as a whole. Obviously, though very successful, Robert Monroe was a normal person. He was just a man. He was no more a messiah than you or I, at least not like the ones you hear about in the religious texts. He didn't have superpowers or extravagant fame. He could not manipulate the infield aside from astral travel. But that isn't the point, is it? What we can all learn and take away from this is the understanding that we individually are all pieces of the whole. We all have our part to play, whether consciously or subconsciously, in the expansion of human consciousness. Now, Robert's role, like many others, was that of a facilitator. The only question really was where to start. How do you go about leading people to open the door to possibilities lying in wait outside of their waking lives? The singular question that holds the greatest taboos, the most stress and fear, wonderment, and especially despair is the question of what will happen after we die. The fear of death is such a formidable barrier to human spiritual growth. Robert realized that he needed to answer this question and also help people answer it for themselves. So he changed the focus of the Monroe Institute's research. Using HemiSync and the gateway process, they would establish a new set of protocols to seek out what he calls a death insurance, to completely and utterly know what happens after we die. As we know, Robert was no stranger to ghosts or the occasional lost soul in the out-of-body state. He'd been trying to help them in any way he could for years. He'd even successfully contacted his own father following his death. He says that he located him in a white room with one window, and that his father had been convalescing and extended warm greetings to him. So the Monroe Institute developed 5 more focus states. Just to refresh your memory if you don't remember, the gateway process involves different focus states. The ones we know of start at 1 through 3, which is mind-brain synchrony. This is where HemiSync starts. Focus 10, your mind is awake and alert, but your body is asleep. Focus 12 is a state of expanded awareness beyond the body. Focus 15 is the state of no time, where your consciousness is not necessarily bound by the laws of time and space. Focus 21 is the edge of time-space in the 3rd dimension. The new set of focus states were known as the lifeline system. Focus 22, where humans are still in physical life, have only partial consciousness. In this state, the explorers discovered people suffering from delirium, chemical dependence or alcoholism, or from dementia. It also includes patients who are anesthetized or comatose. Focus 23 is a level inhabited by those who have recently left physical life, but who either have not been able to recognize and accept this, or are unable to free themselves from the ties of the Earth-life system. This includes those from all periods of time, so this is where the ghosts are. Next are Focus 24 through 26. This covers the belief system territories, occupied by non-physical humans who have accepted or subscribed to various premises and concepts. These would include religious and philosophical beliefs that postulate some form of post-physical existence, or afterlife. Souls may linger here until they are ready to move beyond these attachments. Focus 27 is the site that we may call the reception center, which looks like a very nice park. This is an artificial synthesis created by human minds. It's a way station designed to ease the trauma and shock of the transition out of physical reality. It takes on the forms of various Earth environments in order to be acceptable to the enormously wide variety of newcomers. The most general variation of this would be the park, as I mentioned before, but there are other iterations of this, such as a cigar room or a conference room or a cottage by the sea. Oh, this is another weird one. I think I've been to the park. About 10 years ago, a mentor, a very important person in my life, passed away, and a couple days after his death, after I went to bed, I dreamt that I was sitting on a park bench in this gorgeous park with him, and it was a very pleasant experience, and he explained to me why he died, and he explained that everything was going to be okay, and it's so strange because it was such a real dream. I mean, I was there and I've never forgotten the dream. I can remember it just as if it was yesterday. So it's like, was it my subconscious trying to cope, or did I receive a signal just like Robert did? Finally, Focus 28 lies beyond not only time-space, but human thoughts. Residence in 28 or beyond limits any return to a physical human body. It's sort of the point of no return. The objective of the Lifeline system was for the Monroe Institute's explorers to guide and assist newly deceased humans to the reception center. Once you die, ideally you would be accompanied by one of the Monroe Institute's guides, and you may slip away into the belief system territories where you will be welcomed by those of your own particular creed or faith. Others will continue to the park in Focus 27. Here you will have several options of what to do next. If you so choose, you could have a reunion with loved ones who have previously died. You can also choose to communicate with those who are still alive on Earth in physical state. They can also facilitate the renewal of contact and return to the original self, the I there, the soul cluster. You could also choose to return to experience another life on Earth as a human. You could reassume physical life activity in other forms, like animals or plants. You could also assume temporarily the retrieving role by assisting the Monroe Institute's guides. You would also participate in studies and exploration of other phases of the consciousness continuum.
Lifeline is an exploration into these other energy systems beyond physical death. And in our exploration, we found what would look like a park that had been created by human minds in some era prior to our recorded history. And our teams in this Lifeline program made over 1,300 individual trips to this Focus 27, which is a place where humans, after they die, can go and recuperate long enough to decide what they want to do next. And it is not a religiously based thing at all. It's simply a place of rest and recuperation. Over 1,300 individual trips. That's pretty convincing. Suggests that it may well be a reality, does it not?
Through the final years of his life, Robert Monroe, alongside with his dedicated explorers at the Monroe Institute, journeyed beyond the physical world. Together they offered guidance to countless lost souls, helping them transition out of the Earth life system. Whether strangers or loved ones, each soul found a path home, guided by a compassion that transcended life itself. Their work reminds us that we're never truly alone, and that, in the end, we are all connected by something greater than ourselves. Robert Monroe passed away in 1995 after finishing his final book entitled The Ultimate Journey. It's believed that following the death of his dear wife Nancy, he chose to end his orbit and move on to his next adventure. Now, if you're still here, this book, there's a story as to how I came to be in possession of it. I saw the Library of the Untold's video on the Gateway Experience, and I had been on a 4-year hiatus from YouTube. I never thought I would come back. But after I saw that video, I just had this weird fire lit in me that I wanted to make videos again, but I had no idea what to make a video on. So I just went to a used bookstore and I went to the weird section. You know the one. It was not even like in the shelf like this. It was faced out. I came across Robert's last book on the Gateway Experience, and this was such an obscure topic until about a year ago. And like obviously it's used, but it's like used in a really good way. It belonged to David Jansen in September 1999. And if you know him, you have to prove that you know him, but email me and I will see about getting this book back to you, because he dog-eared so many pages. I have no idea who this guy was, but he was very, very into astral projection, and he knew a lot, because not only did he like underline things, but he left me all these notes in the margins. Like almost every page has something underlined and then a note in the margin for like more things that I should research. A very lucky experience to be able to own. Just to find this book is like a miracle to me. It made my research so much easier because of all of these notes that he left. So yeah, if you know him, just email me. Thanks for watching this series. I'm happy to be back. I'm sorry this one took a little bit longer. I broke my knee, but I'm getting back in the swing of things, and I'm looking forward to hopefully making 2 more videos this year. 2 more? All right, thanks guys. Bye.